it was really, when we made that shift to it being about Ernest and Molly and their love for one another, it opened up a whole new arena of ideas for us.
Your hotel room was a revolving door for every, hot young thing in town.
Wow, you can't believe what you read.
You're listening to Duck Dust FM. Well, like any enjoyer of good cinema, I'm a sucker for a good old Scorsese picture. The legendary filmmaker has rarely, if ever, missed, and has made more masterpieces than bad movies, a feat unmatched by almost any other director in Hollywood history. So is the latest film in his esteemed filmography another crime film masterpiece, closer to the ambiguously acclaimed Irishman, or something off-brand and underwhelming? Well, I don't know. Let's try and coast through the 9 hours of plot first and get back to that. The film begins with a peace pipe ceremony where the chief complains that his people are being taught by and mixing with white people. An incredibly common but totally subtle theme in this movie before we cut to Leo DiCaprio returning home from World War I to live with his brother and rich, not at all suspiciously evil uncle Robert De Niro, who likes to be called King, which is his middle name but also gets him turned on by the power dynamic. He and Leo talk in a scene that I assume was accidentally recorded in between takes, where Leo monologues about all the type of women he'd fuck, stopping short of saying he'd fuck a refrigerator if he thought there was a slutty calzone inside.
Hey, Peter, do you mind?
But I have to get dinner.
Go out.
Leo starts to work as a cab driver.
I can take in $350 a week, sometimes even more when I do it off the meter.
It is uncoincidentally introduced to and eventually married to Molly, an Osage woman whose family has become wealthy from the oil money, and DiCaprio puts on his DiCaprio charm to a woman who is under 25 in the film's first plot twist. Meanwhile, the other Osage are getting knocked off for their oil money, with no investigations from corrupt local sheriffs, and by no coincidence, De Niro starts to wink and nod to DiCaprio that if more of Molly's family were to have accidents, then the money would go to him. So after some subtle speeches about how evil those dastardly white crackers are, each of Molly's sisters and family members are picked off one by one under the direction of De Niro and Leo, who is doing his best to play it cool to his wife while he hires local idiots to kill her entire family by various means, including blowing up her sister's house. The Osage try everything to solve the murders, including hiring an American Sherlock Holmes, who is murdered, and sending someone to D.C., who is murdered.
A lot of killing.
So after saying fuck it, Molly, who is slowly dying of diabetes and poison insulin, gets on a train to DC to go all the way to Calvin Coolidge to do something, and he dispatches Leo DiCaprio, J. Edgar Hoover, and the pre-FBI to send Jesse Plemons to investigate suspects like other Leo DiCaprio. Upon seeing that the feds are poking around and the heat is on, De Niro concocts a plan to pick off all his past accomplices so that the trail can't lead back to him.
Something very familiar about all this.
But one eventually gets away and rats him out, leading to the whole thing blowing up and Leo being outed as an orchestrator. The BOI says he can testify and take it, and he does until Brendan Fraser and De Niro are granted a private meeting to tell him he's fucked if he does, and he goes back on his word, leading to his arrest. But after news comes that one of Leo's kids has died, he changes back and testifies in open court. Then, 6 hours later, the film ends with a weird live-action radio show retelling of the movie and what happened after, where the film ends with Scorsese himself coming out to say how fucked up it was that in Molly's eventual obituary, the murders weren't even mentioned. Now, the main complaint about The Irishman, if you can remember, besides a 70-year-old man trying to pass for 30, even with a truck full of CGI, was its ridiculously excessive length. While it was telling a mostly real and complex story, the pacing wasn't executed well enough to justify a near 4-hour runtime. The same thing can be said for Killers of the Flower Moon, though with some slightly different caveats. Droning scenes about things of little ultimate importance and Dave Filoni-style extended pauses between dialogue slog the film down at least an hour or so of what could have been a slicker and more effective film. Yes, Scorsese has the merits and then some for creative license and justifying a 3-hour-plus film. Just look at Wolf of Wall Street. But like so many other things in Hollywood nowadays, just because you can doesn't always mean you should. I mean, for fuck's sake, the original draft was a damn near novel and well exceeding its final runtime. Speaking of original drafts of the film, the early synopsis had the film being not only about the vicious real-life Osage murders, but also about the complex investigations and how it shaped the FBI in its early days, a plotline that is still evident in the final cut, but has been pushed to the background, with them only showing up in the last hour. And while what we got isn't really bad per se, you can't help but think what the original draft would have had in store, with plenty of interesting stuff to use, such as Jesse Plemons' character, and one of his Osage men infiltrating the Osage to help solve the murders. Yet that type of story was perfected in another Scorsese movie.
Whoop-de-fucking-do.
And on a side note, I guess it's not really plagiarizing if you copy yourself, but the Goodfellas parallel, especially regarding De Niro's character and whacking the guys who could rat you out, and the protagonist having to point De Niro out in the courtroom are pretty explicit, though I'm not complaining. What I will complain about, though, and prepare those accusatory istophobe comments, is the redundant hammering in of white man bad into the audience's face. Yes, the movie is about how a bunch of white assholes exploited and murdered hundreds of Osage people and the government doesn't give a shit until they have to come to their front door and pay them, which is all true and horrific. But the film goes to redundant and unnecessary lengths to point out who the villain of the story is and what exactly they look like. This goes back to my constant gripe about treating the audience like a bunch of blender-brained wojaks who can't figure out that the guys befriending the Indians for their oil money all while fucking them over and murdering them while their friends with the KKK might be the bad guys. Yes, most of the white men in the movie are as bad as they were in a real-life story, but the incessant reminder, especially in our hyper-politicized hellscape of a timeline and entertainment landscape, doesn't really do more than bog down time and mood of an overlong and already depressing movie. Lastly, on the acting front, the performances are generally good with the exception of some minor characters and a sadly disappointing turn from Brendan Fraser. De Niro competently still pulls off his villain persona, while Jesse Plemons and others turn in acceptable outings too. The standouts obviously are that of DiCaprio and Lily Gladstone, which are sure to land Leo a nomination, and Gladstone a guaranteed win at the Oscars, despite the latter crying and dying in bed for the last hour of the movie, but still shines in other parts. 5 out of 10. A blasphemy score for a film from such a legendary name, but a generously honest one at least. Killers of the Flower Moon may not have the box office bravado of its competitors, but it has the Oscar bait ammunition of a CIA-funded rebellion in a third world country, and they'll eat that shit up come award season. But even with the hilarious and likely challenges of Barbie and the Taylor Swift movie in the best adapted screenplay category. If I had to sum it up and put it in the context of someone else like Spielberg, I'd say Raiders of the Lost Ark is to Goodfellas what Schindler's List is to Killers of the Flower Moon, if that makes sense. Perhaps not, but when does anything in Hollywood nowadays? Fucking like and subscribe for duck's sake.
The Duke.